Chicago Bears general manager Ryan Poles broke a trash can or two in frustration during last season. He's setting expectations high for winning games in 2023, and he was worried about one team in particular sniping one of their second-round picks this year.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and we love our everydayers who tune in 5 days a week. On the show today, we're going to catch up on a few things Ryan Poles has said in recent interviews that are anywhere from interesting to predictive to educational based on what we saw last season, what we saw during the draft, and what we're expecting for the upcoming year this year. We'll talk about Ryan Poles breaking trash cans out of frustrations and try and pin down when that might have exactly happened. We'll talk about where his expectations are for this team and whether or not it's realistic to win the NFC North. And we'll wrap up with what we learned about the Bears draft process, where they almost got a player sniped, why they feel so special about another late round draft pick in particular, and how they're handling some of the front office dynamics with him and assistant general manager Ian Cunningham. But I want to start with an interesting anecdote Ryan Poles shared in an interview with 670 The Score on the Bernstein and Holmes show when he was asked about, just kind of the process of watching that 3-win season last year and trying to manage the emotions of, not wanting to see your team lose game after game after game. And Ryan Poles admitted that there were some moments there where perhaps his emotions got a little bit more the best of him.
Ryan, what did you learn about yourself as a watcher of Bears games? Because different general managers either control their emotions differently, compartmentalize them, or completely hide them, knowing that sometimes you might be visible on camera. You don't have the luxury of doing what I get to do, sitting on my couch and throwing things at the television and stomping around sometimes. So do you sublimate that tension, or do you not have that tension during games?
No, you know what? It was a really good learning experience this year. I probably experienced all of the above. There was times where I probably didn't control myself very well. Thankfully, I wasn't seen and broke a couple of trash cans. But
when did you break the trash cans?
I can't tell you that. I can't tell you. During a frustrating time. So there's those moments, but then it's also like, all right, you got to keep your composure. You got to let kind of that 24-hour period kind of sleep on some stuff and then show up the next day with a clear mind and really about finding solutions rather than pointing at problems and letting your emotions get the best of you. So really good learning experience. Probably, like I said, just being transparent, probably hit all of the above.
Again, that clip is courtesy of Bernstein and Holmes on 670 The Score, interviewing Bears general manager Ryan Poles there. And, we could sit here and have the very serious talk about, Ryan Poles being a well emotionally regulated managing general manager who, was able to learn and grow and how good that is for the franchise. But that's not fun. Let's have some fun with this. When do you think Ryan Poles broke trash cans this season? There were a bunch of moments this past season that were really frustrating. I'm sure for you watching the game at home, moments you wanted to throw your remote into the television. You wanted to flip your living room table over and storm outside and just let off some steam because this team had a few of those moments. And Ryan Poles wouldn't tell us specifically which moment he broke trash cans. I have a few candidates. I would love to hear what you think in the Locked On Bears YouTube comments, or tweet us at Locked On Bears, or post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group your break the trash can moment this season. I think the one that jumps out to me as I think probably the most obvious for Ryan Poles, maybe the reason why he wouldn't want to say it, but the one that I think we could most strongly connect the dots is at the end of the first Minnesota Vikings game when Smith-Marsette fumbles. The Bears turn it over, the Vikings recover, and ultimately the Vikings then win that game on that last drive. Emir Smith-Marsette was released a day later, 2 days later. That would seem to me like the direct result of perhaps Ryan Poles getting really frustrated and kicking a trash can in the press box, or in wherever the general manager sits at Soldier Field, and doing some damage there. That one to me jumps out right away as the potential trash can breaking moment. But Poles mentioned that it might not have just been one trash can, and that was part of the emotional learning process for him going through this. I imagine that as the season goes on, right, when the team loses, 10 games in a row down the stretch to end the season, they didn't win a game after week 7. Like, by the time you get late in the season, you're kind of used to the losing, and it probably isn't as frustrating and might not elicit the same emotional response because you're a little more used to it at that point. So it feels to me like earlier season moments where you thought the team had a chance to win a game and then ultimately they didn't. And I wondered if the Velus Jones muffed punt against the New York Giants at the end of that one, turn it over, wasn't at the very, very end, but certainly eliminated their possibility there. In that same game, too, the Daniel Jones naked bootleg touchdown where he ran untouched in the end zone, I think twice throughout the course of that game. I could imagine any of those moments building the frustration. That Giants game was such a frustrating game to watch. And I imagine the general manager shared some of our frustrations in that moment. Maybe the Darnell Mooney at the end of the Washington Commanders game where Fields threw him the touchdown pass, but he was tackled and pushed just outside of the end zone, not across the plane. Turnover on downs instead of game-winning touchdown. That one took a booth review to confirm. So I don't know if Poles would be so frustrated while he waited for the entire booth review, and then when the review came through, then he was still mad enough to kick the trash can. I think that had enough time involved with determining was he in, was he out, that the frustration maybe doesn't boil over there. But I would throw out at the end of the Bears-Dolphins game, too, when Equanimeous St. Brown dropped the pass on 4th and 10. Fields flushed out of the pocket, throws to him in the flat, and it hits EQ in the hands, falls through, turnover on downs. Bears lose by 3 in a game that, again, felt like they should have won. So I think the fumble by Emir Smith-Marsette is the clear-cut number one break a trash can moment, I think, for Ryan Poles this past season, even though he wouldn't tell us. And then from there, I'm open to debate on Velus Jones muffing versus Daniel Jones touchdown versus the Equanimeous St. Brown drop pass and maybe Mooney, but Mooney feels like perhaps another step down. Is there a moment I'm missing? Please let us know, again, in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, on Twitter at Locked On Bears, the Locked On Bears Facebook group, because there were plenty of those moments. There's no shortage of frustrating break a trash can type moments this past season. I would love to hear, which ones you think Ryan Poles may have kicked and broke a trash can over, and which one you did the equivalent in your household of what was your breaking a trash can. Tell me what you broke or what you did in anger and what moment it was that made you angry. Maybe we'll read some of the best ones and go through some of the best ones right here on the podcast. So let's keep that conversation going. But I want to get into some of the other things we learned from Ryan Poles, not just from that Bernstein and Holmes interview, but he did an interview with ESPN 1000, and he was also in another episode of the Bears documentary series 1920 Football Drive. And so we'll get into his expectations in terms of wins and losses this season, even while they're still sort of rebuilding. And we'll also glean a few details from the draft process about players he liked, players he almost didn't get, and how the assistant general manager is involved next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Built Bars, the world's best tasting protein bars, because Built Bars don't taste like other protein bars. They taste like candy bars. They're soft, they're easy to chew, and every Built Bar is covered in 100% real chocolate. It really gives you that sweetness of a candy bar, but somehow it's good for you. Every Built Bar is low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. We're talking 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. It's an elite combination. I eat one literally every single day. I'm almost out of my raspberry ones in the cupboard right now. I need to get some more here soon, but they've got a bunch of delicious flavors you can check out at built.com, or you can get them even quicker at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. If you're near a Walmart, over by the pharmacy section, they got the protein bars, and you can pick up a 4-bar box of their cookies and cream bars, their double chocolate bars, or their coconut puffs. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box with 2 of my all-time favorite flavors, Brownie Batter Puff and Churro Puffs. Tasting is believing when it comes to Built Bars, so go check them out and thank me later. Ryan Poles is doing this sort of like post-draft interview circuit right now. It's sort of been a little bit coincidental with the timing of the release of the 1920 Football Drive episode about the draft too, but he was on Bernstein and Holmes. He was on ESPN 1000. You know, they kind of put him out there every once in a while just to answer questions and be a face and a voice for the fan base to have him be more visible and more accessible as a result. And one of the other things he was asked about, and I'm not going to play the whole clip for you here, but was about like expectations for this season and what we should expect in 2023. And after last season, we kind of knew they were tanking, but not, not fully tanking, but tanking enough to get the number one overall pick, clearly. Like they weren't like intentionally throwing games, but they weren't intentionally doing everything they could to win games. And we knew last season that wins and losses were not going to be something we should get too wrapped up in. But how do we approach that then in sort of year two of Ryan Poles, where a lot more of his young pieces are in place? The roster is a lot more his and contracts he's signed, but even he has admitted, yeah, this still isn't where I want it to be just yet. He has said out loud in press conferences, we can't fill every hole on this roster in one offseason. There are still more needs that need to be addressed. And we talked on Monday's podcast about potential free agent and trade options for pass rushers, because Poles hinted that, hey, something could happen sooner rather than later when it comes to the defensive end position. But regardless, like, it's not, the foundation is being poured, but it's not concrete in place yet for this team, right? It's largely there, but it's still a work in progress. So then what do you set as expectations this season? Because it's not going to be another year of just, tanking and trying to get another as high a draft pick as possible and lose games and stuff. You got to start winning some games, showing progress and showing improvement. But then what does that look like, right? What kind of expectations? How do you determine then whether this season is a success or a failure? Certainly, I think the main thing, it needs to be like improvement, but improvement can be a lot of different things. It can be an abstract concept. Like, if they won 4 games this season, that would be quote unquote improvement over last season, but not really the kind of improvement we're looking for. And I was interested in how Poles would approach this question, because of course he's not going to put a number on it. Yeah, we got to win 12 games this season. No, but what he did say was like, listen, we are still in this growing process. We are a younger team that will need to get better and is going to experience some growing pains along the way. And basically admitting like, yeah, we're not going to be a Super Bowl team in 2023. But he did kind of double down and say, listen, like, the goal every year is to win the NFC North. That is the standard by which, they said we want to have like a championship mindset, and we hold ourselves to the expectation of our goal every year is to win the NFC North. And when we don't win the NFC North, that's coming short of our goal. That means we need to keep doing better. Like, that's sort of then, is that the expectation? You start to nitpick the nuance of the words here, semantics, expectation versus goal. Is the goal the same as the expectation? Maybe, maybe not. But I did want to explore a little bit this idea of like, okay, how realistic would it be then to go from 3 wins last season to winning the NFC North this season? It's certainly, you don't see teams make drastic leaps that quickly historically in the NFL. The teams go from, number 1 overall pick to winning the division. But the Jacksonville Jaguars did from 2021 to 2022. They drafted Walker with the number 1 overall pick last year and went from 3 wins in 2021 to 9 wins in 2022 and won a weak AFC South division. And you can't help but look at the NFC North right now. Not that it's the weakest division in football necessarily, but it's not a strong one. And I think one of the interesting ways to measure this is to look at the odds over with our friends at FanDuel for just like regular season win total and how close the odds makers there think this division might be. So right now, the over-under for Bears wins this season is set at 7.5. Basically, they're saying they'll be around a 7 or 8 win team, give or take, is kind of where they're placing their odds at this stage. That would be significant improvement from 3 wins last season. More than doubling your win total to get to 7 or 8 wins, almost tripling your win total. But 7 or 8 wins likely isn't going to win the division, because 8 wins is now under 500, you may remember, with the 17-game schedule. And you're not going to win this division at under 500. But you compare that to where the other teams in the division are. Like, for example, the Bears play the Packers in week 1 and week 18. The FanDuel over-under wins for the Packers is set at 7.5, the same number as the Chicago Bears. The odds makers expect the Bears and Packers to finish with roughly the same record. They're both projected in the odds to be third and fourth in the NFC North, as far as, where the betting odds are on who's going to finish first, second, and third and fourth. But really neck and neck with the Packers there at the bottom at 7.5 wins. Then they have the Minnesota Vikings at 8.5 wins and the Detroit Lions at 9.5 wins. So based on where the odds makers are now, what separates first and last place in this division is maybe 2 wins. That's all it might take. To me, that signals a fairly wide open division, right? We don't want to say completely wide open. Chances are low that the Chicago Bears win this division. They are the long shot odds. The Packers and Bears are both the longest odds to win this division. We shouldn't necessarily I don't think we should expect the Chicago Bears to win the NFC North this season. The Lions are the favorites. The Vikings are the second favorites, and the Packers and the Bears are tied for third/fourth at the bottom. But there's not this massive gulf then between last and first. And I think that leaves more room for volatility compared to, other divisions across the NFL where you might think, like, for example, like the Chiefs in the AFC West, like the Chargers will be good, but that's the Chiefs division. And the Bills in the AFC East, like the Jets will be better with Aaron Rodgers, but that should still be the Bills division. And the AFC North, like the Bengals with Joe Burrow, should be in control there. The Eagles in the NFC East should be in pretty good control there as like the best teams in those divisions. And then it's kind of everybody else competing for second and third and fourth. The Lions are clearly the favorites in the NFC North, and the Lions should be expected to win the NFC North. And therefore, the Bears are not then expected to win the NFC North, and that maybe shouldn't be the expectation, even though it should be the goal. I think the expectation should be significant improvement and giving you confidence in the direction that this team is moving in towards 2024. The other expectation is that you should have a fairly definitive answer on Justin Fields, one way or the other. You should either know we're set, he's good, we're good to go, or he didn't take the step forward, he's not the guy, and we need to make a change at quarterback. Like you need to know one way or the other. The goal is for him to be great and to be set at quarterback. The expectation is you get an answer on him one way or the other on what the quarterback future is going to look like with the Chicago Bears. And I think all signs point to positive direction there, positive growth in this team, and maybe a puncher's chance, an off chance at trying to win the NFC North, or at least compete for the NFC North, be in the mix for the NFC North, and maybe you ultimately finish a game or two behind first place, and it's a tight division, but not a strong division. Very much like close in final, but not anybody great. Like it's more, less top heavy, a little bit more dense in the middle there for this Bears team. But interesting that Ryan Poles is still kind of staying behind the division as like, that's what we want to do. We win the division. We aim for championship. We're aiming for winning the division, and we got to get better. That seems to be where we're setting things when you look at this Bears schedule for 2023. He also let us in on a little bit more on the NFL draft, particularly from the 1920 Football Drive documentary series behind the scenes that the Bears do on their YouTube channel. A couple of notes stood out for me that I think add a little interesting nuggets to what happened and almost happened and almost did and didn't happen on draft day. Next on Locked On Bears. So the Bears do this behind-the-scenes documentary called 1920 Football Drive, and I'm really glad that they've been giving us more of a behind-the-scenes look, because it felt like under Ryan Pace before him and in previous regimes, they were a lot more closed off, a lot less transparent about things, didn't want to give access to some of that stuff because they felt like it was such a competitive advantage, even though good editing and blurring out stuff in videos can kind of eliminate any competitive advantages. But appreciate that not only that Ryan Poles' frequency of doing interviews, like we heard already, to give us more information vocally, but also these behind-the-scenes videos. And in the latest 1920 Football Drive, it goes through the pre-draft process for the Bears, the Senior Bowl, the Pro Days, the Combine, the workouts, and then draft day and the conversations with the players and stuff. And there were a couple of little nuggets from that I wanted to point out that weren't like, super obvious big things that I think tell us a little something about how draft day was going and what could have happened or almost happened. And the interesting moment that, again, I'm not going to play it here because it's a quick thing and it's hard to illustrate, certainly over audio for the podcast listeners, is that they show the Bears, but right before the 53rd overall pick in the second round there. And they said, they cut to Poles and Ian Cunningham sitting in the draft room, and whoever's working the league office's phone in there says, Seattle Seahawks are on the clock, 52nd overall pick. The Seattle Seahawks take Zach Charbonnet, the running back from UCLA, and you see like Poles and Cunningham, whoever they clap, like, yes, like they were like, it was kind of this like relief, right? It was like, whew, all right, yes, let's go. Like, we're good. Like we're good. They put in the pick Gervon Dexter Sr. And to me, that signaled right away, like they thought, or they were worried that the Seattle Seahawks were going to take Gervon Dexter with that 52nd pick, one pick right before the Bears picked at 53rd and got their guy from Florida. Because, you go in this draft in the beginning of the second round, the Seahawks took Derek Hall, the edge rusher from Auburn, who we talked about a little bit on the podcast. And then they ended up in round 4 drafting another like athletic nose tackle, defensive tackle prospect in Cameron Young, who I believe played at Mississippi State, but similar kind of build, like 6'3", 304 pounds, like on the lighter side for a nose tackle, an athletic guy, but can play more of that interior position. So I think based on how worried and then excited and relieved they were when Seattle took Zach Charbonnet, that signaled to me that they identified the Seahawks as a team with a need at the defensive tackle spot and thought they might be a team that would take Gervon Dexter. Because Poles talked about like just being worried as he stayed on the board as the picks went farther and farther down. And I imagine there was some kind of, I don't think relief, but some kind of feeling and response when 2 picks earlier with the 49th overall pick, so I guess 3 picks from the Bears, Keanu Benton went to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 49. I think that's when the Bears started sweating and said, okay, another defensive tackle off the board. What if Seattle takes him 1 pick before us? Then what are we going to do? They probably would have taken Zach Pickens perhaps at 53, or they could have taken Tyreek Stevenson, I suppose, but they'd said how Pickens and Dexter were very, very close to each other on their draft board. So it just makes you wonder, like, what if the Seahawks almost took Dexter there and what that would have looked like for the Chicago Bears? A couple other little tidbits from the video, from the documentary there that I found interesting. When Poles after the draft talked about the small school defensive tackle they took in the 7th round from Kennesaw State, Travis Bell, Poles talked about, him being a special person, a special human being, that when they had Travis Bell in the building or whatever, Poles didn't want to leave, that they made this special connection, that they just really liked each other, and that Poles wanted to spend a lot of time around him and really wanted him as a part of the football team. That whole description from Poles right after the draft at his press conference wasn't talking very much about Travis Bell's tape. I mean, he did talk a little bit about athletic traits that Bell has or whatever, but like, the immediate sort of like, why did you like Travis Bell, was not very much X's and O's. It was very much like off the field personality, person, human being, character, culture type of conversation. So I found it interesting in just a little brief moment in the video. They show Poles on the phone calling Travis Bell to make the 7th round pick, say, hey, this is Ryan Poles, we're going to make you a Chicago Bear or whatever. What he said in that moment was, you have special tape. Like, your tape is special. And to me, that was a little bit more than what we had gotten from Poles up to this point. Like, not only do they believe in Travis Bell the person, and of course they don't draft him if they don't think his tape is good, but like Poles was telling him straight up, like, we see something special about you on film. And that was a distinction for Bell that I don't think we've heard Ryan Poles really expound on very much since then. Like, he said, yes, we liked him, we liked his tape or whatever, but there's going to be a challenge going from Division II to the NFL and trying to make that transition. But like, for him to tell Bell in that moment, like, hey man, you have special tape. Like, they didn't tell that to everybody. They don't use that exact phrase for everybody. With a lot of guys, like, hey man, we like the way you work, we like the way you do this, and we're excited to have you as a Chicago Bear. Specifically for Bell, it was special tape to go with what he had already said in the press conference of like special human being, special person, special player. Now it's also special tape. Like that, I think there's some real internal expectations for Travis Bell. I think Ryan Poles really feels like he found one there with Bell as somebody that can be a lot more than what you bargained for with the 7th round pick there. And the last thing that stood out was just how involved the assistant general manager, Ian Cunningham, has been in all of this process. We knew he was kind of a, second in command, right-hand man type thing, but when the Bears were trading with the Eagles to go down from 9 to 10, it's Ian Cunningham on the phone for that process. And general managers always have someone be the designated like phone guy so that they can watch the draft and be aware that, they're delegating all the different roles. So it's not surprising specifically that Poles wasn't on the phone, but that Ian Cunningham was that guy. And that we saw Ian Cunningham do the pre-draft press conference instead of Ryan Poles. We saw in the documentary when they're doing these one-on-one visits, like at the combine, Ian Cunningham is playing darts with them at the combine or doing the putt-putt with them. Like, Ryan Poles was very much there and involved in the process, but allowing Ian to get the experience to do all these things and to really build himself up as a future general manager candidate who's likely going to be gone next offseason. Some team is going to hire Ian Cunningham as their GM very, very soon. And as a result, the Chicago Bears are going to get a third-round pick in draft compensation. Is it 2 third-round picks or just one? At least 1 third-round pick in draft compensation for a minority hire leaving the organization to become a general manager for another team. I think he's going to be a really good general manager for another team, and I'm worried he's going to be too good of a general manager for another team and help some other team go really, really far and ultimately get in the Chicago Bears' way sometime in the future. But there's a special connection between those two guys, Poles and Cunningham. I think Poles is a really smart evaluator, a good human being. He seems like got a good head on his shoulders, and Ryan Poles is clearly mentoring him, grooming him, building him up to be a future general manager. And it's cool to be able to see that visually in this 1920 Football Drive documentary. Highly recommend you go back and watch that whole video. It's like 20-minute episode that takes you through some cool behind-the-scenes stuff, and you hear from the scouts and the GM and all that stuff through that process. But just wanted to kind of go through some of the interesting tidbits from that about the draft and those prospects there, and some of the interesting tidbits from Ryan Poles' interviews, talking about the schedule and expectations and which moments made him kick trash cans this season. Still want to hear from you if you haven't gone in yet, to leave a comment on this video on YouTube or tweet us at Locked On Bears or in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. What was your kick the trash can moment this season or this past season? What do you think Poles' kick the trash can moment was? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We'll maybe put them on the show. However you do it, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day, and we love our everydayers who are tuning in 5 days a week for your daily Bears fix. Barring some breaking news, I think tomorrow we're going to talk about how well the Bears are set up for the future, like over the next 3 to 5 years, what the long-term future looks like for this Bears team, and how that compares to a lot of teams around the NFL, and why the Bears might be one of the best set teams for the long-term future, just given young players and the assets that they have. I really want to explore that dynamic a bit more on tomorrow's podcast. So come back and take a listen for that. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.